Hello, and welcome to Lopes on Movies. My name is Joey Lopes, and today I am joined by Mark
Hello.
and
I'm
Connor.
not gonna do your stupid alliteration thing.
Alliteration, what are you talking
Whatever it is. Sorry.
Yeah, what do you mean? Like him emphasizing certain
Yeah.
syllables, I think is what you said.
Yeah,
That one,
I
that
told you
one.
guys last week that I'm trying to do a thing where I do every episode's intro a little bit different so that we don't get stale, because that's it's a thing you got to be very careful of when you're doing a show like weekly. People could get tired of it, so you gotta do things to keep it fresh. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
I'm sensing doubt in my.
I think that
methods.
was a swing and a miss, Joey.
All right. I'm back to the drawing board.
But I'm excited for this one.
Oh, this is going to be a
Yeah.
fun episode, guys. I've actually been looking forward to this one for I guess ever since last night, because last night I rewatched the first movie we're going to be talking about and was like, oh, this should be fun. So of course it is still October, which means it is still Lynchtober. And I love how you guys laugh every time I say that, because you know that I don't want to. But we're still talking about David Lynch. It's been a lovely month of getting to go over some classic David Lynch films, starting from the beginning and working our way up to the end. And man, we are getting close, fellas. We're getting real close. Last week we of course talked about Wild at Heart and The Straight Story. And this week, we're going to talk about Lost Highway and Mulholland Drive. So Lost Highway actually came out, I think, 2 years before The Straight Story came out. But in a lot of ways, I feel like Lost Highway makes a lot more sense to talk about with Mulholland Drive.
It would have been a very strange show if we went Lost Highway and Straight Story.
I mean, granted, it was strange to talk about
Yeah.
Wild at Heart and Straight
Yeah,
Story.
Wild at
but-
Heart. Yeah.
Yeah, but Lost Highway and
parallel.
Mulholland Drive are related
Yeah.
in some key ways, I think.
Very much so.
And we'll kind of get into that a little bit, but I don't know who wants to do the synopsis of Lost Highway.
I'll read it.
Go for it, Mark.
All right. Anonymous videotapes presage of musician's murder conviction. A gangster's girlfriend leads a mechanic astray. Not very in depth, so maybe Connor, you can give us a little bit more on what Lost Highway is about.
And this is a trap. So Lost Highway is roughly. So I've heard Lynch talk about this one before, and it's kind of like he said that it was his inspiration for this was loosely inspired by the O.J. Simpson trial and everything around that, which if you watch the film makes sense, because what happens in this is the lead, Bill Pullman, does something really bad, and then he kind of becomes another person in a way, and it's a whole situation of who are you? What do you if you don't know yourself? Are you the same person? It's a very hard movie to grasp. Which is why critics didn't really like this movie that much when it came out, and I think it's divisive. It definitely is not like it's not The Straight Story.
Yeah.
No, it's not The Straight Story.
Yeah, but it's a very interesting movie with some very creepy vibes and excellent acting by Bill Pullman and Patricia Arquette in the leading roles. So, Joey, how about you just rewatched this,
I
the
did.
other day? So, how about what was it like going to revisit this one?
Yeah, so I watched this last night because it had been a while since I've seen it. I've seen Mulholland Drive like 600 million times, so I felt pretty comfortable with that one. But this one I needed to rewatch because I needed to kind of get this back into my brain. And it's interesting, having watched pretty much all of David Lynch's movies up to this point now, I'm recognizing that Lost Highway is kind of a big turning point for Lynch's career and his filmmaking, because I feel like every Lynch movie going forward after this has a little bit of Lost Highway in it, where he started to become very fascinated with very similar both stylistic devices in the filmmaking, and just kind of themes and subject matter.
Yeah.
So we're dealing with doppelgangers, alter egos. He's doing these scenes with now very, very slow and dreamlike pacing, which is stuff that he's hinted at before, but really takes to the next level in movies like this. And even more interesting is a lot of structural ambiguity and these kinds of devices that make the actual action of the movie just like tougher to grasp at the start. So we're talking about like plot lines that aren't necessarily linear completely, and storylines that definitely challenge you to use your head a little bit to kind of unravel if you want to. But beyond that, also just movies that are very, very, very atmospheric. And to me, like there are hints of him kind of developing this style over the course of his filmmaking. But Lost Highway feels like a very, very, very big turning point where pretty much everything going forward is a little bit like it. And it's kind of a nightmare.
It's pretty dark.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I wanted to ask, is this the first movie, I guess setting aside maybe Twin Peaks and definitely setting aside like Eraserhead, that has like people that kind of feel like they're from another place, like from somewhere else? I guess in Twin Peaks terms, it would be people from like one of the lodges. There's like kind of these odd characters that just kind of, they're almost like, I don't want to say like spirits, but like
they feel
some
like
kind
that,
of odd supernatural presence permeates a lot of his movies, especially from here on.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you get that in Mulholland Drive too. In
sort of a comical one way. Of the obvious. Yeah,
we'll talk
there's
about
some creepy ones in Mulholland Drive too, but it's well worth talking about how those go together. And
absolutely,
actually, another way that they really match is this like midpoint turn. I don't know if there's like a proper term for that, but like the like, it's not an act break because it comes at like almost the middle of the movie where just like something huge happens that doesn't. It's related to personalities of characters, and what you had mentioned in terms of like the O.J. Simpson trial is really obvious here. I have a quote actually. He says, "And we found this great psychology term, psychogenic fugue, describing an event where the mind tricks itself to escape some horror. So in a way, Lost Highway is about that. I'd say it is definitely about that personally, but there's like, it's very, very, very direct about. It's not so much a fugue as, I mean, like, is it okay to say what happens at the act break? He literally becomes somebody else.
Yeah, that's the thing that's so fascinating about it. This movie is the first straight up like David Lynch movie that has a thing that completely pulls the rug out from under you and leaves you kind of like in no man's land, wondering like what transpired,
what happened,
and how you're supposed to respond to it.
Yeah, and the strangest part is like in terms of the movie, the world doesn't know how to react to it. It feels like the world is very normal, sans this like odd supernatural event that happened, because like when they find somebody else in his jail cell, they're just like, oh, you're not the right guy. I guess you can go. And that's just like the movie keeps going from that point, and it's just like an entirely different thing.
It's so interesting because I think, Mark, that's a great point, that because the movie plays it so straight and like of how it would happen in real life, your brain can't process it. So you're like fighting yourself, kind of like trying to understand it, but it still this is the ultimate, it makes sense in your heart but not your head movie.
Oh yeah.
And it's especially towards the end too, which it's like it's like almost impossible to spoil this movie for somebody, because I don't know how you wouldn't
understand it anyway. There's no like twist. It's just like you see it, it's like, okay, yeah, that's about as weird as they had said. The mystery man in particular, I go back and watch that scene all the time.
Oh yeah.
It is just such masterwork in terms of making something so unsettling and so creepy without any real, there's no props, there's nothing. It's just the sound work. Like the scene starts where he's just kind of standing, our main character standing in the middle of this like sort of chill house party, there's music going, and then he locks eyes with a guy with no eyebrows. This is a very repeated thing in Lynch movies.
Yeah.
No eyebrows. And
he's small. His skin is like
he's just like
completely
it's like
pale.
too big for his body.
It's Robert Blake, also the actor. He's tremendous in this. Yeah.
And he just kind of comes across the room at him, and the music just slides down and stops.
Yeah.
And you're just left with dead silence, and maybe like a little bit of like some kind of ambient echo, and the guy just like blurts out at him. It's the mystery man just has like this commanding presence about him, and he's only in the movie for like 2 minutes maybe, but he like makes it somehow. Like I don't think it would be the same.
Yeah,
his presence is felt throughout the entire thing, though, because it's so unsettling. Like, as in that scene, it's in the trailer, so I think it's easy to say. He tells him that he's in his house right now.
Yeah.
And he's like, what? And then he's like, he gives him a cell phone, and he says, call me.
Call me. It's my favorite.
It is so unsettling. It's so creepy. It's just...
and it's not... It's just like a situation that just worms its way into your head. It's a lot scarier than what I've seen in other horror movies, like more traditional ones.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like all in basically character design and dialogue that it gets you.
Yeah.
Because it's just him standing there with this massive 90s cell phone up to his head, asking this creep how you did that.
Yeah, because he's talking to himself because he's talking to him
the guy
through the phone,
of him.
And he's it's mind bending.
It's awesome,
but it's fantastic.
Yeah, I think in watching it the second time, like you're hazy on some of the specifics, but you can kind of get a sense for what the story is about, more or less. And I think that's something that going forward becomes a pretty like I felt, in other words, I felt the same way about Mulholland Drive, which we're gonna talk about in a minute, where in the moment when you watch it, it can feel very disorienting. But if you, as you think about it, and you might not be able to catch up to your interpretation while you're watching, it might take a little while, or it might take a second watch. But once you do, you start to recognize that there is a clear through line. There is a clear kind of like thematic through line, if not a completely logical story through line. And to me, that's when it becomes like doubly rewarding, where you recognize what. I don't want to say that you're confused that while you're watching to the point where you're irritated, because you shouldn't be, right? Like you might be a little bit disoriented, but it's still a very powerful emotional experience, and you have these kinds of loose ideas in your head flowing around that you're trying to make sense of, right? And then once you think about it a little bit, suddenly those ideas start making connections, and you start to have this like strong internal understanding. And to me, that's like the key to Lost Highway and Mulholland Drive.
I think at their core, both of these movies are, I don't want to like state outright what they're about, but they have and not an immediately obvious, but a interpretation that fits what's going on in them. And honestly, at their core, they're relatively simple in terms of what the actual, I guess, theme of each of these movies is, or like what is going on in them in a general sense. But then once you get into the detail and into the reads of it, they kind of like just became this sprawling, like it's not incomprehensible, but like it just kind of it attacks you in a certain way.
Yeah,
like it's difficult to see the full scale of it when you're in the thick of it.
Yeah, for sure. But I think the experience it's really unlike anything. I remember the first time I watched Mulholland Drive, which I know we haven't gotten to that section yet, but I feel like it's relevant because that was, I think, maybe the second David Lynch film I saw. I'm pretty sure I saw Blue Velvet first, but I remember the first time I saw Mulholland Drive, I knew I'd never seen anything like it, and it's transfixing because in the kind of thick of it, when you're trying to make sense of it and you're trying to understand how the pieces of the story connect to each other, not in so much a logical way, but even in an emotional way, it's like extremely powerful, and like it just ropes you in. It's like pulls you into this like fascinating dream world. And that was when I knew, like, okay, I gotta David Lynch, he's got something going on here. right? And from there, I was just absolutely transfixed with his work. And yeah, I mean, to me, like, just to bring it back to Lost Highway to kind of conclude this, there's the opening credits of Lost Highway are amazing, and I feel like it puts you right in the mood for whatever weird stuff is going to go on going forward. It's a great, actually, it's an image that David Lynch uses a lot, which is like kind of shooting, I guess, the view of what you would see through a car windshield at the road in front of you on like a dark, like unlit street. But it's moving very fast, and there's this really, really memorable David Bowie song playing while the titles come up. And yeah, like you watch that and you're like, all right, let's go. Let's see what you got for me, David. And yeah, I mean, I don't think Lost Highway, like I think Lost Highway should be thought of as more than just a stepping stone for getting to Mulholland Drive, which I think is considered one of Lynch's greatest works, Mulholland Drive. But I wouldn't discount Lost Highway. I think everybody owes it to themselves to watch that.
Very good movie in its own right. Yeah,
get the unique experience of that particular strange nightmare that is Lost Highway. So Connor, let's talk about Mulholland Drive.
All right, so next one, Mulholland Drive, which came out in 2001. But there's a whole lot that happened to get to the initial release of this feature.
It's true.
Yeah,
So
I can talk about that in a moment.
Yeah, I mean, you want me to start talking about it now, or just read the? I'll just talk about it now. So the idea for Mulholland Drive was originally thought of as like a spin-off of Twin Peaks originally, and it was supposed to like revolve around the character Audrey Horne, who was played by Sherilyn Fenn in Twin Peaks, and you know it didn't happen. And the character Betty, who was played by Naomi Watts in Mulholland Drive, is the one who eventually kind of took over that role. So this original idea for Mulholland Drive was to be another TV show that was going to come out all the scenes. The pilot was originally shot in 1999, and Lynch has this story about the way that the executive at ABC watched the pilot, where he says the pilot was watched by this executive at 6 a.m. while he was standing up on the phone drinking coffee, and he didn't like it. so that was what killed Mulholland Drive as the TV series. So that's what happened, and that was what it was going to be. And then a Paris production company, liked the idea, provided him funding, and then he had to come up with a way to make this into a feature film, and he did, and they ended up shooting, more, and they had, I think, 18 pages or something of a new script, and boy, it, the rest we'll get into.
The rest is history, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, Mulholland Drive. After a car wreck on the windy Mulholland Drive renders a woman with amnesia, she and a perky Hollywood hopeful search for clues and answers across Los Angeles in a twisting venture beyond dreams and reality. It stars Naomi Watts, and the thing that's pretty incredible about this one is that Naomi Watts was kind of trying her best to make it as an actress in Hollywood for, I believe, a decade, and I think it was Naomi Watts was friends with David Lynch's assistant, and from there he got her headshot, and then met with her, and she was perfect for the role, and the rest is history. Naomi Watts is one of the best actresses in Hollywood, so it's it's kind of interesting the way that happened. So this is Naomi Watts' first role
in a major movie. Yeah,
Mark.
Yes.
Mulholland Drive.
Oh man, where do you even start with Mulholland Drive? I guess it's like this, like Joey kind of alluded to, very split down the middle, much like Lost Highway, except that the tones of the two halves of this movie are so different,
diametrically opposed. Yeah.
The first, I guess we'll call it half. I think it's more like 2/3, but
yeah,
whatever. It is just this like. There are dark moments, but it's almost this idealistic, happy-go-lucky picture of Hollywood and like what you would imagine it to be if you were a high schooler at a theater kid. This is what you would dream of it being. It's La La Land. And then the second half is this like miserable reality of like just dreary, awful, terrible things that may or may not be more realistic than the other half. And then like sprinkled throughout is this like, I wouldn't necessarily call it a mystery, but it feels like there's a lot more going on that's hinted at than what's like currently facing you.
Mm-hmm.
I think the core of the plot is the relationship between Naomi Watts, who plays Betty, and Laura Harring, who plays Rita, who are like, in the first half, instant friends. Betty is trying to help Rita recover her memories, and Rita is trying to help Betty make it in Hollywood. And then there's also this side, like, parallel plot following the director. What is his name?
It's Justin Theroux.
Yeah, he's played by Justin
Theroux,
yeah.
who has, in my opinion, one of the best. Like, by the end of the movie, if you could call it a character design, costume design, he's got one of my favorite like looks in film ever. Yeah. By the end of the movie, he's like wearing this like long black trench coat splattered with pink paint. I don't think he has his golf club still, but I like to imagine he's still got his golf club.
Oh, I love that character so much.
He's amazing, and there's like a sort of thing where those mysterious sort of supernatural beings seem to be pushing a meeting between him and Betty. And it kind of like comes to a head at the middle of the movie, if I remember correct. And then from there you see the rest of it. But those like odd, like the cowboy is obviously
yeah, the cowboy's your example there of a mystery man.
He's just amazing, and I think, if I'm not wrong, and I have the book in front of me, he wasn't actually like. I believe he was just like.
I think he was one of Lynch's friends. He was
one of Lynch's friends.
Yeah,
and there's a funny. Lynch tells a funny story about he couldn't remember his lines, so he had like. I think he had like Justin like holding like signs with his lines, but the guy his eyes weren't great, so he was trying to read the lines like in the
but
scene.
it works.
Oh, it works.
It works
so
with
well.
a character.
Yeah.
Yep.
You have to wonder how Lynch convinced him to shave off his eyebrows, but I guess he's just like, okay, there's sometimes a buggy.
Yeah.
It's amazing. He's they're these like just iconic characters that show up for 2 minutes and then are just gone, but they like imprint upon something deep in you.
Mm-hmm.
Everything they say like just kind of resonates, even though it doesn't really make immediate sense.
That is something that Lynch is great at. No doubt about it. Yeah, I think so. Connor mentioned the kind of production history of Mulholland Drive, and you don't have to know about it before you watch the movie, but if you do, it explains a lot about why the movie is the way it is. But I don't think that's something that you should think of as a negative thing, right? Like, imagine like you're David Lynch, you shoot this pilot for a show called Mulholland Drive, right? And as is typical of pilots for television, you come up with a story, you come up with some characters, you come up with a situation, and you leave a lot of threads to explore later in future episodes. And you might not even know where those threads are going, but you put them out there as something to kind of inspire yourself for writing future episodes should the show get picked up, right? The show doesn't get picked up, but he gets the money to finish it as a feature. So he has this pilot, this basically finished thing, and he has to figure out how to end the pilot in an extra 30, 45 minutes or so, right? And turn it into a coherent narrative. And that's a really interesting challenge because obviously like when a pilot is going to set up so many plot threads and is going to imply that you could go on for a much longer period of time. So you have to figure out like what is the pilot and what can you do with what is right there to turn it into something different and conclude it in a way that feels satisfying. And what he came up with is just so fascinating because I have to imagine that a lot of the ideas that he put into the pilot were not necessarily going towards that direction where it goes in the last third of the movie or so. Like without spoiling too much, it has to do a lot with the characters in the first half. You get a sense in the second half wondering whether or not what you just saw actually happened. And
like
you
how
wonder
much or any of it.
Yeah, like and you start to wonder like was this a projection? Was this a dream? Is there something else going on here? And I have to imagine the pilot, that was not the case. It was just these were just the world and the characters, and it was going to continue to go on, right?
To your knowledge, was the first portion of the movie almost like exactly what the pilot presented?
Pretty much, yeah. That's pretty much how I understand it. Like and you can tell too, because when you watch the movie, like there are even things in the second half that are not brought up again. Like there are characters that show up in the first half of the movie that you never see again.
There are some scenes that were taken out, and there is like a cut of the original pilot that's somewhere lurking around. But there are some scenes but one of the perfect examples of that is Robert Forster is in the movie, and then he's in it for like a couple scenes as like a detective character, and then you don't see him again.
He has an interesting meeting with somebody, I think. I'm thinking of the right person, correct? Behind a diner.
No, that's a different character. Robert Forster is a police officer early on. You're thinking of the guy behind Winkies, which of course is the one of the most iconic scenes from Mulholland Drive.
Very good scene.
I feel like everybody will never forget that one. All right, so we're coming up on the end here, guys. So I just want to say, you got to watch Mulholland Drive. Like to me, Mulholland Drive is like one of those essential like top 100 movies you got to see before you die. You know, like default, like you got to watch it. It's for me, it was a big turning point in my own understanding of movies. But I think everybody owes it to themselves to experience that, just because it's so unlike so many things, just because of the structure of it and how unique it is to see the solution for this problem that David Lynch had, and how brilliant and emotional and magnetic it is.
So would you say, out of like all of it, if you had to pick one thing to watch of Lynch, Mulholland Drive?
Maybe, honestly, like that it's my favorite David Lynch movie, I think.
Okay.
It might be mine too. Like, but it, like, Lynch had to do this. He said that when he had to adapt this pilot into a movie with like more scenes, he said he meditated for a while because he had no ideas, and then like a string of pearls, there it was.
Oh yeah, he mentions that in his book. Yeah. He's always meditating every day, 20 minutes at the beginning and the end, but this is the only time when he has meditated that the idea came to him as he was meditating, fully formed and just there. Usually it's more about making yourself ready to think of things like this. It's just like, nope, he got it all there. And if you think about it, it actually does kind of make sense that the solution to this particular problem would just kind of, like, after it starts, it just kind of flows from there. It's interesting.
And honestly, in hindsight, like when you watch the movie, you have a hard time feeling like it could have ended any other way. That's the beauty of it. Well, all right, guys, we'll be back next week, and we'll have some I don't know what we're doing next week actually, but it'll be good.
We have a rumor that Lynchtober might be slightly extended.
So slightly extended, perhaps by one day. We'll see.
Lynchtober's going to keep going as long as Joey keeps getting annoyed by the name.
I guess so. All right, we'll see you guys next week. Goodbye.